Well, hello there, and welcome to Beer Christianity. It's Jonty, as you may or may not know if you're a regular listener. And if you can hear the sound of gentle breeze on the microphone, which will sound kind of something kind of chilled and, mesmerizing, like if it's going badly. But if it's not, you may even be able to capture. I wanted to come out because I'm kind of in the middle of nowhere, the middle of Cornwall. And you can hear the sound of a stream rushing by me. I'm standing outside in a coat and pajama bottoms because I wanted to get the atmosphere, because this is full immersion podcasting with really, really high fidelity audio. And I wanted to come out and just because it's just such a beautiful vibe, totally dark kind of mountains all around me, or hills maybe, with little kind of spots of light in various places, and the sound of water rushing below, and the sound of wind through some of the trees, and the sound of the sea in the distance, and just really quite special and beautiful. A very beautiful place called Mount Hawke, which sounds like it's from Lord of the Rings. And the next town over, according to the signs, or not town, village, whatever, is Mount Pleasant. Where do you live? Mount Pleasant. How about you? Mount Hawke. Cornwall, really, really beautiful. I am in Mount Hawke, near a place called St Agnes, where I spent a very happy time with my two best friends a couple of years ago, and I have just returned for a short break between Christmas and New Year, and I'm hoping that this podcast will go out before New Year. And thinking about the year that's gone by, I wanted this one to be about suffering. And I found an interview with Philip Yancey, who I do not remember interviewing, but apparently I did because I'm on the recording, as is he. And it's an old recording, so his position may have changed. So, Mr. Yancey, if you're displeased with this going out there, I'm terribly sorry, but I think you're very wise, and I think people need to hear this stuff. If you're not Mr. Yancey and you don't know the man, read Soul Survivor, How My Faith Survived the Church. It's very good. It's particularly good if you're a writer. Just an FYI. He wrote a whole bunch of stuff, including What's So Amazing About Grace, and I think when I interviewed him, he just released something about suffering, so yes. Anyway, that's an intro. I'm going to go inside now before I freeze my nads off. Alright. Okay. Very, very chilly out there, and very, very nice to be back inside a large static caravan. And sitting in front of my computer, and also sitting in front of a bunch of Cornish beers. Now, I have opened one, but there's a few things I have, I'll be honest, been drinking Prosecco for most of the Christmas period because of the aforementioned 2019 year of suffering. That's a new hashtag. But since I'm in Cornwall, I bought Cornish Scrumpy in a litre bottle, because that seems fine. Cider with a Y, don't know why that is, you can let me know by tweeting us at BeerXianity on Twitter. You can tweet us on Twitter, it's the best place to tweet us, really. And I also have Wolf Rock IPA, which looks like a kind of bigger brand, as well as Cornish Lager from St Austell Brewery. You see this everywhere here in Cornwall, so I'm assuming that's in Korev. I don't know how to pronounce any of these Cornish names, by the way, but I'm foreign, so if you criticize me for it, that's a hate crime. So, yeah. And then I got this one just because I freaking love cryptids and cryptozoology, and that is The Beast of Bodmin, a warming ruby ale by Penpont Ales. No idea if it's from Cornwall, but But the one I have chosen to open, and I think it was a good choice, is Bolsters Blood. Bolsters Blood, a dark, rich porter. I don't usually like porters, but this is a good porter. And it's smoother than a lot of porters I have tried recently. And I know that's weird because a porter is supposed to be smooth, right? Or is it? I don't know. I don't know anything about beer. But it's really very good. I have no idea who Bolster is, but there's a picture of his head cut off. Maybe he's a pirate. It's Cornwall, that sort of thing. Anyway, this is by Driftwood Spars Brewery, which is, I actually saw the building of this, but they were closed because it's between Christmas and New Year, and it's Cornwall. Well, it's England, really. Yeah, and Driftwood Spars Brewery is at Trevornance Cove, Trevornance, Trevaunance Cove, St Agnes, which is really, truly one of the most beautiful beaches I've ever seen in the UK. Just a very beautiful place. And I've even swum there in November, which I don't know if I've mentioned this, but I'm super into wild swimming, bit of an aficionado. Yeah. Anyway, it says Driftwood Spars Brewery was originally established in 2000 and is situated in the stunning Trevornance Cove, St Agnes, Cornwall. The brewery is part of the Driftwood Spars pub and B&B and probably has the best sea views any brewery has. Next time you're down on the beach, pop in and say hello. Yeah, this is a very nice, almost sweet, I want to say. Whenever I say anything about the taste of any of these beers, I just worry that actual, beer Nazis out there are going to attack me. So, yes, thank you very much to Driftwood Spars Brewery. Not because you gave this to me for free, but because you made nice beer and because you're making it in a really cool place and it looks like you're living the dream. And really, somebody should be living the dream. Okay, I've chatted enough. I'm going to talk in between these things because some of the quality of the recording of the questions is not super great, but Philip Yancey really has some interesting things to say about suffering, and I'll tell you some of the other stuff a little bit later that I need to tell you.
I would say the unique contribution that Christianity makes to suffering is that God is on the side of the sufferer. In fact, God has joined the one suffering. And not all Christians understand that or propagate it. I talk about how very often Christians will become Job's comforters, where they'll say, well, it's because you did something wrong, God is punishing you or whatever. And in that way, we're conveying the opposite. We're conveying that God is against the sufferer. God is maybe the cause of the sufferer. And as I see in the New Testament, Jesus specifically always refutes that idea and says, no, God is on the side of the sufferer. And when Jesus was on earth, we have a very clear picture of that because we see how he handled people who were going through difficult times, either illness or a disaster, a tower falls on them, or an act of terrorism. He never lectured, he never philosophized, he always responded with comfort and healing. And then, of course, Jesus himself, we Christians believe, the incarnate God, Jesus himself took on suffering. And Hebrews has those remarkable phrases that he learned obedience through the things that he suffered, and he was made perfect through the things that he suffered. Amazing phrase.
Yeah.
That we don't know what to do with. There's part of the mystery. But the conclusion in each of those is that God is on the side of the sufferer. And I find that even though that's a great comfort that we have, it's not one that we're doing a very good job of getting across. Because so many people who go through difficult times think, I'm being punished, God's against me, I did something wrong, and we miss that underlying comfort that there are some mysteries surrounding suffering, but the underlying message is that God is on your side, God is with you. That's what the word Emmanuel means. God is with us, and that's decisively shown in God willingly taking on suffering on our behalf.
Okay, so a few things there. One, I am so sorry for the number of times that I give my sympathetic interviewer, I actually quite unkindly, quite recently, somebody who worked for me passed me an interview that they had recorded, and I took all of their and and weird little noises that they made, and I put it to a very basic hip hop beat, but it was unkind, but it was funny at the time, and I'm sure somebody will eventually do that to me. So sorry. That carries on and gets worse throughout the interview, but the interview does get better. I'm going to let you listen to the rest of it in a bit. I just need to say, if you have any things that you think I should discuss with Drabs and with Law when I'm back in the land of the living, aka Oxfordshire, and I don't really believe that, obviously. Cornwall is just as much the land of the living as Oxfordshire is. I just like to take on British prejudices because I'm not here. Well, not from here. I am here. I'm very much here. I'm also still drinking Bolsters Blood by Driftwood Spars Brewery. It's really very good. But a few things. If you'd like us to discuss anything to do with suffering, we already have one suggestion from Twitter that we're going to discuss in another podcast episode, which will be what effect would meeting aliens have on our faith, which I think is going to be pretty cool. Or worse, big existential crisis. Kierkegaard the astronaut says, Kierkegaard the cosmonaut says, what effect would it have if there is indeed no life out there? So we're going to be doing that. But if there's stuff that you wanted to talk about in terms of suffering or observations in terms of stuff that Yancey has said, stuff that you agree with, that you disagree with, then yeah. For me, what he's just said, that God is always on the side of the suffering, is just incredible. In a bit, he's going to be talking about how the cross is actually the perfect symbol of that, and also about what we as evangelicals get wrong about that, and about particularly evangelicals. I say we, you may not be an evangelical, but what evangelicals, who are my people, get wrong about suffering, and also perhaps why we get it wrong. But basically, if you'd like to get in touch with us on Twitter. It's BeerXianity. That's at BeerXianity. So put an X in place of Christ, because, Xmas, not because of that, because Twitter's handles have to be quite short. And tweet at us. That's probably the easiest way. You can also follow us on Instagram now. Beer Christianity, I believe, is what our handle is. You can look us up. And obviously, you can email us at beerchristianity@yahoo.com. But get in touch, leave a comment. Also, do leave reviews and stuff like that. Really important. If you can review us, if you can share an episode you particularly like. If you like the podcast, why don't you tell people about it? But if you don't, also don't. There's no pressure. And even if you do, you don't have to, because we love you that much. But if there's stuff you want us to talk about, if there's stuff you'd like us to include, please do drop us a line and let us know. And now I'm going to let Philip Yancey talk to you a little bit more about what people get wrong about suffering, and about Jesus and God's attitude to suffering.
I've just been reading the book How God Became King by Tom Wright, by N.T. Wright. And he talks about how the evangelical branch of the church doesn't do a good job of putting together the kingdom and the cross. That we are here to live out the message of the kingdom that Jesus brought, but that message was most fully realized in the suffering of the cross. And evangelicals tend to focus on the cross specifically in terms of atonement. Jesus paid the price to get rid of sin. But actually, the Gospels present the cross as the crowning of the kingdom, as it were. It blends the two together. And the early church understood that. They understood that in advancing the work of the kingdom, suffering would inevitably follow, as it did for Jesus. The tradition in which I was raised saw Jesus as kind of the answer to all of our problems. So if we get sick, we pray. If the world has problems, Jesus will come again and fix those problems. And that's a rather different approach, a different narrative than something that Tom Wright pretty compellingly describes.
Yeah.
There is also, I think, a perfectionist strain in evangelical theology. It came out of the Keswick movement in your country and a lot of similar movements in my country, so that we see God as the answer person. So if you have a problem, God is the answer. In fact, even today in the South, the American South, which is the Bible Belt, you'll still see this phrase, Jesus is the answer. And I think that's there's some truth there, but it's a partial truth.
Yeah. He's the answer to some quite specific questions.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Okay, for the record, I thought that joke deserved a much better response from Yancey. But that's fine, because my next question is super deep.
How do you believe that God, that there is any meaning in phrases like God hears your prayers, when there are inevitably going to be times where, as you detail in the book, that, the prayer of somebody who's being tortured does not seem to be answered. The prayer of somebody saying, please don't let my loved one die, doesn't seem to be answered. How do you personally navigate that? How are we supposed to?
I guess I personally navigate it by an awareness that I have very limited vision. I don't know what all is going on in reality. That seems to be the message of Job. At the end of Job, where God gave that magnificent speech, he basically said, Job, you have no idea.
Yeah.
That was the message in Daniel. When Daniel prayed, his prayers weren't being answered. And specifically, in answer to your question, we have the scene of Stephen being killed, being martyred in the book of Acts. He cries out to God, and his prayer is heard in heaven, and Jesus is preparing to receive him. It's not answered in the way that maybe Stephen's family wanted it to be answered because he died.
Yeah.
But clearly it had an effect, and in fact, it had a remarkable effect because one of the people who was participating in that stoning was a man named Saul, who became the greatest missionary in history.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the hope that we have, and that Paul expressed so eloquently in Romans 8, that even though our prayers may look completely ineffective and useless, actually God can use all things for our good, for the good of the world, in ways that we can't possibly understand. When Paul later looked back on his own life, there were all sorts of things in there, shipwreck and beating and imprisonment, snake bite, and yet he was able to say God used all of these things for good. So my job is faith. That is the message of Job. God said, my job is to run the universe, and I'm doing that quite well, thank you.
Yes.
Whereas Job said, but then he turned to Job and said, that's not your job. You couldn't understand it. There's no way you could understand it. Your job is simply to believe me and trust me. And that lovely ironic twist at the end where Job's friends who had all these neat theories of why things happen were dismissed with a snort by God. I'll only listen to them if they pray through you, my servant Job. And Job did one thing and only one thing. He clung to faith when there was no reason to do so. And that's what we're asked to do in those times when it looks like our prayers are not being heard.
Fantastic.
So, again, apologies for the, I agree. Please like me, Philip. Please, I'm smart. Sorry for that. But interesting answer there, because on the one hand, he talks about the Job comforters and Job's friends and how they want to give neat answers. But then the answer that he gives, and this is no criticism of the man, but because I've given it myself, and I think I probably believe it as well, but the idea that, well, God is in control, like you can't tell a grieving person that. And I think it's important to kind of note that that's fine to believe. I'm not sure it's fine to say to somebody in the throes of grief, in the same way that I believe that people are called to forgiveness, but you don't get to, as somebody who hasn't just suffered horrifically at the hands of somebody else, piously tell them to forgive any more than you can piously tell them how to run their sexual life or any of that kind of stuff. I think that maybe one needs more than just God is in control. For myself personally, I start and finish on the position that God is perfect and good, which may be just a weird attitude to authority, but I don't actually think that's where it comes from, because I wasn't raised particularly to respect authority, and I definitely wasn't raised in a Christian household. But I start from the God that I put my faith in when I became a Christian. I believed that he was good, and that he loved me, and that he was perfect, and that he knew best. And that was kind of the submission that I made to him that I've retained. So I know that a lot of very healthy, very good Christians get angry at God. I don't think I've ever been angry at him. I've been angry at the world, and I've definitely loathed myself. And I've been angry at his followers, obviously. And I've definitely gone through periods of genuinely not understanding and doubting, well, maybe he doesn't love me anymore. But never, that's his problem or that's his fault. Just, well, maybe I did something wrong, which I know is not what we're supposed to believe. Or maybe, shit just happens, God allows shit to happen because in his infinite wisdom, if he didn't, other bad things would happen. Or because from a different perspective, I don't know, to be honest. And in the periods of suffering that I've gone through, even in this year, in previous years, with illness or with heartbreak or with any of that kind of thing, I think I don't think it's particularly comforting to go, oh, well, everything will work out for the best, because it's like that drug that they said they were going to bring out for people who couldn't take anesthetics when they went to the dentist, which would just erase the memory of the pain, but you would be fully conscious throughout it. On the one hand, that's great news. On the other hand, that's the most horrific thing I've ever heard. And I think that's kind of what that argument is, if you're trying to make people feel better through it. So anyway, another aspect of suffering that we haven't considered yet is the constant avoidance of suffering, the constant seeking of pleasure or doing anything to avoid suffering yourself, and the kind of negative consequences that can be. My day job works for an organization that tries to alleviate suffering. Is that ultimately, philosophically, theologically, a bad end? Are we purified through suffering like some people believe? Are we meant to gain wisdom through suffering? There's definitely a strong tradition within Christian thinking that teaches that, and obviously other religions have different attitudes to it, from Buddhism and some Vedic traditions saying that the existence in the material world and the existence of being in a place where you have desire in itself is suffering, and that the avoidance of life is the avoidance of suffering, and that sort of stuff. What is our attitude to the avoidance of suffering supposed to be? And he gives a really reasonable answer, which you'll hear in a bit. But first, the next beer. The next beer is Beast of Bodmin. Okay, guys, cryptids. Do you know what cryptids are? They're like animals that we're not sure if they really exist, but actually maybe they do exist. I don't think of this in a kind of supernatural kind of way at all, and I'm not saying at a conspiracy theorist level or anything overly credulous. I just love the idea of large animals that are not accepted to actually exist, then suddenly being discovered to exist, which I think happened with a form of rhino in Vietnam, I want to say, in the last 20 years. Rhino, hippo, something like that. A relatively large creature is what I'm saying. Anyway, Beast of Bodmin is supposed to be this large cat or family of large cats that got released sometime, I don't know, when people had menageries, so probably the Victorian era, around the Cornish kind of countryside. Is Bodmin in Cornwall? Suddenly doubting myself. And if the baying Cornish mob is not going to come and get me, then this may do it. Anyway, the Beast of Bodmin Moor, just really, really cool as an idea. And I like it very much. And this beer, I'll tell you what it tastes like. Oh, that is very nice. It is very smooth. It's a bit thin tasting, weirdly. Not like, but I guess I've just been drinking a porter, so that makes sense. Because this is a warming ruby ale from Penpont Ales, who say that they are based in the wilds of North Cornwall. No idea whether where I am in Mount Hawke / St Agnes is North Cornwall, or it feels like it's in the north, in that it's on that kind of north coast. So yeah, you should try that. Really do try the Driftwood Spars Brewery stuff. They're really awesome. And Penpont Ales also very cool. And come visit Cornwall. It is really, really delightful. And it may be the ultimate antidote to suffering. But as Philip is about to tell us, well, it's not that simple, man. It's not that simple.
Well, we have a two-pronged message, don't we? On the one hand, we're clearly given the mission to attack injustice and to comfort the afflicted, and we have the example of Jesus going through life doing that very thing. On the other hand, Jesus also gives the message so clearly capsulized in the Beatitudes. It's the poor who are blessed, those who mourn, those who are being persecuted. So, in a sense, we're having it both ways.
Yeah.
The strong are to care for the weak, for the vulnerable. I love this phrase that I learned from Dr. Paul Brand, with whom I wrote 3 books. And he said, a healthy body is not a body that feels no pain. He was a leprosy specialist, and the problem with disease leprosy is that you don't feel pain, so you destroy yourself.
Yeah.
A healthy body is not a body that feels no pain. A healthy body is a body that feels the pain of the weakest part. So in a healthy body, the strong are to help the weak, and that's exactly what your Christian society is doing. At the same time, we know that not all weak are going to be helped. We're not going to be able to remove all suffering. We're not going to be able to solve every problem. And yet, even for those people, even for those who are going through persecution around the world for their faith, for poverty, there can be a message of comfort that comes directly from God. That is Jesus' message. So, we in a sense, we do have both sides of the coin. We spend our life trying to remove the impediments to a person thriving, and yet we also say suffering is not necessarily an impediment either. Actually, it can be a cause for growth. It can be a cause for great advancement. I remember reading a survey of people in your country, in London, who were elderly people, and they asked them, "What is your favorite time of life?" And 60% of them said, "Oh, it was during the Blitz."
Yeah.
Now, here was this horrible time where your buildings are being destroyed, where people are dying. I mean, just this awful time. And yet it pulled out the best in people, because as they ran to the tube stops and sang songs and were visited by the royal family, and they had a sense of community, a sense of mutual support that has never been surpassed since then. And so even in the midst of our difficult times, our challenges, God is at work. Emmanuel is with us. And as Paul said, good can come out of even that.
That's the very lovely Philip Yancey talking to me many years ago. And Philip, if you are by some crazy miracle listening to this podcast, gosh, I hope you are. Thanks so much for all the great stuff that you've done for people through your books, through being just a generally decent human being in Christian public life, and for being smart and wise, and also a good journalist, and bringing all of those good journalist ideas and approaches to our Christian public discourse. It's been a delight to have you on this podcast without your knowledge. And if you would like to be on our podcast with your knowledge, that'd be truly amazing. So, get in touch, because we're something of a big deal in Didcot. So, that ain't nothing. Thank you, dear listener, for listening to this episode of Beer Christianity. If you'd like to find us, you can search for us on Spotify. You can search for us on Apple Podcasts and iTunes. You can search for us on Stitcher. You can find us on YouTube. And we also have a presence, though you can't actually listen to the podcast, on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Twitter. If you want to get in touch with us, Twitter is probably the best way. BEERXIANITY is our handle. Beer Christianity, but you can search for Beer Christianity and you'll find us generally on most of these platforms. If you want to find a full list of the episodes on a webpage that is not particularly well designed, then you can go to beerchristianity.libsyn.com. That's Beer Christianity, those two words, no spaces, .libsyn, that's LIBSYN.com. Do rate us, do review us, do share us, and do get in touch as well and tell us if there's anything that you'd like to hear or that you wouldn't like to hear. And tell people about the podcast if you think that they'd enjoy it. Thank you so much for listening to Beer Christianity, and we'll hope to be back in 2020. Imagine that. Thanks also to Driftwood Spars Brewery for providing just really nice beer, and to the Pen Pond guys as well. Keep doing what you're doing. And thanks, Cornwall, for being beautiful and, haunted and full of weird mining chimneys coming out of the ground. It's awesome.